Hey guys, today we're going to talk about a new anime of the season that you're sure to enjoy. Imagine living alone in another world. In Loner Life in Another World, Haruka is transported to a new reality full of magic and challenges, where he must survive on his own. Will he become the hero he never wanted to be? Leave your like, subscribe, and come and discover this epic journey. On a typical school day, Haruka is sitting alone at his desk. He's a complete loner and he's well aware of it. In fact, he prefers it that way, since his only other option would be to interact with his classmates, and he despises them deeply. The class is divided into several groups: the delinquents, the popular girls, the gym bros, and, of course, those no one really cares about. Haruka doesn't belong to any of these groups, and he's perfectly fine with that, as it gives him more time to read his books without distractions. However, his quiet reading is interrupted when an intense light begins to shine under his feet. A summoning circle seems to be forming, also involving the other students in the room. For a moment, Haruka is excited, realizing that this means only one thing. He is about to embark on an isekai adventure. But just after that thought, he remembers something important. He spent too long consuming isekai media to know that this probably won't end well for him. Determined that he won't be a victim of another world before the release of GTA 6, Haruka decides to flee while the portal is still charging. He runs to the door in an attempt to escape, but unfortunately, it seems to be magically locked. Despite his best efforts, he is unable to open the door. The summoning circle is almost complete, and his classmates begin to disappear, one by one. Desperate to avoid being taken, Haruka decides to climb into the vents in the ceiling and wait for the circle to pass. He jumps and successfully manages to crawl into the ceiling of the room. But just when he thought he was safe, the summoning circle followed him to the ceiling, and he ended up being summoned anyway. He could no longer remain on Earth. Based on what he already knew about these situations, Haruka hoped that a fat king or perhaps a pretty princess would soon appear asking for his help. But, of course, that's not what happened. Instead, he came across a bald old man who, with his arms waving, panicked completely at the sight of Haruka. It seemed that the old man was God, the one responsible for the summoning. He had already sent all of Haruka's colleagues to the other world, but because Haruka had the brilliant idea of hiding in the ceiling, his summoning had gone wrong. Now, God needed to send him quickly to another world before his confusion caused any more problems. He informed Haruka that he would be given skills to survive, but all the best ones had already been chosen by others. Only useless and despised skills remained, such as Minecraft villager skill, dice contact lenses, and a stick. To make matters worse, Haruka could only choose a limited number of skills. Enraged, he took his anger out on God for being summoned and only having terrible options. God, feeling guilty, admitted his mistake. Although he didn't want to hear any more shouting from an angry student, he decided to give Haruka all the useless skills as an apology. But, lacking the patience to deal with him, he immediately teleported him to the other world. Having more skills than normal seemed like an advantage, but it didn't do much good when Haruka was thrown straight into a forest. He had never lived in the wild before and had no supplies. However, he soon spotted a bag on the ground, part of Minecraft's villager ability. This magical bag allowed him to store an unlimited number of items in his inventory. Along with the bag, there was a basic set of equipment. At least Haruka wouldn't start his journey completely bereft of resources. After putting on his outfit, Haruka decides to check his statistics. However, due to the game dice, he has to roll a die to get his points. He throws the dice down, and the result is a score of M. Not understanding what this means, Haruka decides to apply the points to his luck stats. To his surprise, when he opens the statistics window, he discovers that his luck status is completely maxed out, which makes him regret not having used the points for something more useful. While examining the rest of his abilities, he discovers that in addition to the useless skills, he has also gained 2 unique abilities. Being a loner on Earth, Haruka won't be able to form groups in this new world. However, in return, his second ability allows him to force monsters to serve him, as he would have no way of making friends. He feels a little disappointed at not being able to create a team, but decides it's what he has for the moment. What worries him most is the fact that he doesn't see any of his classmates around. He finds this strange, since this should be the starting point, but on the other hand, he never cared about them, so why should he start worrying now? At this point, he decides to focus on getting supplies to live well in the forest. But that's easier said than done, as he can barely see with so many trees in the way. At this rate, it won't be long before he accidentally runs into a monster, which would surely be the death of him. Just then, Haruka remembers his ability with contact lenses. He puts them on, and suddenly, he can see all the information around him. The lenses come with an appraisal function, allowing him to traverse the forest with ease. He finds some mushrooms that are safe to eat and decides to collect some, taking advantage of the unlimited capacity of his villager's bag. He returns to the forest and finds a small cave that seems too interesting to ignore. Haruka says a little prayer in case there is a monster hiding there, and then decides to explore the cave. Fortunately, there are no monsters in sight, and the place is quite spacious, which makes him consider turning it into his base of operations. Haruka takes a tent and a magic lantern from his inventory and sets up a small camp. He lights a fire with his temperature control magic to keep warm during the night. Interestingly, this magic unlocked a new campfire skill, and by keeping an eye out for monsters, Haruka also acquired several detection skills. However, his only attack skill remains a simple staff, and he knows he'll need to find a better way to defend himself. The next morning, Haruka wakes up startled and quickly leaves the tent. To his relief, there had been no monster attacks during the night. He is safe thanks to the anti-monster properties of his seemingly useless abilities. But even if he is safe from monsters, hunger is another story. He grabs a frying pan and cooks some of the mushrooms he had collected the day before. If you're wondering where the frying pan came from, it was in his trusty villager's bag, along with a full set of kitchen knives and even some dried meat. So far, this bag has been the most useful thing in Haruka's arsenal, which makes him wonder what kind of villager would have stored these items. Anyway, after eating, he knows he needs to start planning what he's going to do next. He takes a short walk to reflect. The cave will work as a good base of operations for now, but he still needs to worry about finding a reliable source of food and creating defenses against the monsters that might attack him in this world. Fortunately, with his contact lenses, finding food shouldn't be too difficult. He soon locates more mushrooms and some herbs, which will keep him supplied for a while. However, he still needs to solve the problem with the monsters. Just then, his detection ability kicks in, indicating that something is going on nearby. Haruka decides to investigate and, to her horror, discovers that the noise was caused by goblins. Facing one would be difficult enough, but there are two, and they both seem stronger than him. Haruka wonders if he will be able to defeat them with his current strength and even considers running away. But living in this forest means that sooner or later he will have to fight to survive, so he decides to end it while he still has the element of surprise. Although he's not sure if his staff will be effective, he tries imbuing it with one of his most useless magical abilities to see if it makes any difference. To his surprise, the result is better than he expected. With renewed confidence, Haruka comes out of the bushes and attacks one of the goblins, hitting it on the head. The goblin is dazed and confused, but Haruka doesn't stop, continuing to strike until the monster finally dies. Now there's only one goblin left. Haruka dodges the creature's attack and realizes that the goblin's movements are predictable and easy to dodge. With agility, he dodges and then hits it with a magical blast, defeating the second goblin. Having won his first fight, Haruka decides that he has done enough for today and returns to the cave to rest. On his way back, he roasts some mushrooms for dinner and examines the club he took from the defeated goblin. Although it does good damage, it is heavy and has a limited range, so Haruka decides to stick with his staff for the time being. He checks his stats and, to his surprise, he has leveled up after the fight. What's more, all his stats have been doubled as a result. The next morning, Haruka wakes up and has breakfast as usual, but he's starting to get tired of eating only mushrooms all the time. He'd really like to eat meat, but to do so, he'll have to learn how to hunt. First of all, Haruka needs to improve his health. The first thing he tries is the Magic Fusion skill, which covers his entire body with magic, increasing his physical and magical defenses, as well as greatly increasing his strength, which should improve his efficiency in combat. What's more, his evaluation skill has risen to level 2, so he decides to use it to see if anything has changed. The only difference he notices is a question mark next to the descriptions. Haruka, who has clearly never played video games, spends a minute trying to figure out what the question mark means, but soon gives up and decides to go out to train his magic. As he leaves, he notices something on the ground and thinks it might be meat, but it turns out to be just another mushroom. Haruka is almost delirious, hoping that meat will grow on the trees of this world, but he quickly realizes that this is not going to happen. So he continues his magic training. By activating his mana infusion and taking a step, he is propelled and flies several meters forward. His body is much lighter, allowing him to cross the forest with ease, almost as if he were teleporting. His dexterity has also increased, making his movements easier and his attacks more precise. The first thing he does with his new strength is challenge 2 goblins, and, unlike yesterday, he manages to defeat them with ease. Feeling confident with his renewed strength, Haruka thinks about taking on more goblins, but at the sight of a group of 3, he begins to hesitate and slowly retreats before being attacked. Deciding that he has worked hard enough for today, he returns to his cave to practice more magic. Haruka continues this routine. He trains in combat during the day, and at night he experiments with his magic, seeing what he can do with it. Interestingly, he discovers that he can even create coffee tables with his magic. After this practice routine, Haruka finally manages to defeat a goblin with a single blow, and even creates a decent table with magic. He uses his ability to create a gate to his cave, allowing him to go out hunting at night. Haruka finally manages to catch a rabbit, something he hasn't eaten in a while. Just as he's about to start cooking his prey, he notices something moving nearby. At first, he thinks it's a goblin, but upon closer inspection, he realizes it's something worse, the delinquents in his class. He doesn't want to deal with them and tries to leave discreetly in the other direction, but soon realizes that the popular girls, the gym bros, and the nerds are also around. Haruka doesn't think the nerds are that bad. They were quiet at school, but he still doesn't feel like talking to them now. Finally, he notices the student council with the class representative. Although he hates socializing with others, he has to admit that the class representative has always been very kind to him. Perhaps the least he could do would be to return the kindness, if only to say hello. Haruka considers revealing himself and talking to her, but hesitates. He doesn't want to ruin the solitary life he's finally managed to have. Now that no one knows he's there, he has the chance to be truly alone, as he's always wanted. No annoying conversations, no responsibilities, and no one to bother him. The last thing he wants is to spoil everything by interacting with his classmates, who have always been rather annoying. So Haruka makes the ultimate decision. He's going to completely ignore his colleagues and live alone, conquering this new world on his own. Haruka quickly crouches behind a bush, trying to hide as the delinquents approach. One of them, suspicious, claims to have heard something in that direction and begins to investigate the bushes where Haruka is hiding. Fortunately, when he checks, all he finds is a rabbit, and the group moves on. Haruka lets out a sigh of relief that he hasn't been discovered, but decides to follow them to try and figure out what they're up to. As he watches, he hears the delinquents engaged in an intellectual conversation about the popular girls in the class, which frustrates him because he was hoping to learn something useful. With no one to stop them, Haruka worries about what these delinquents might do, especially to the girls, but believes that the class representative, as always, will foil whatever plan they have. However, he soon hears something alarming. The delinquents talk about using a girl called Mir Tanaka and her ability to get what they want. They decide to return to the camp, and Haruka realizes that these guys are trouble. Yet he refuses to intervene, as this would require social interaction, something he avoids at all costs. Back in his cave, Haruka starts grilling some mushrooms, trying to relax, but then he realizes something that leaves him completely shaken. His loner skill has gone up a level. This means that even his status board recognizes him as a loner, probably because he has chosen to avoid his classmates. However, he tries not to get upset. After all, this isn't the worst thing that could happen. In fact, he even likes the idea of moving up a level, as his overall level is still at 3. The main reason for this is that he has 2 skills that he can't evolve: all-purpose and mannequin skills. To be honest, he's not sure what these skills actually do. The jack-of-all-trades skill probably means that he's reasonably good at a lot of things, but will never be a master of any of them. But about the mannequin skill, he can only think that it has something to do with puppets, although he's not sure. Tired of trying to decipher what these abilities mean, Haruka decides to put it aside and just enjoy his dinner, even though he still craves some meat. With that, he calls it a day and gets ready for bed. However, as he tries to fall asleep, a huge commotion outside wakes him up. He knows he can't just ignore it and resolutely gets up to find out what's going on. On leaving the cave, Haruka was prepared to see yet another of the delinquents' messes, but to his surprise, it was the nerds this time. They were trying to fend off a gang of goblins, but it looked like they were having trouble. Haruka even considered helping them, but when he looked at their stats, he realized that they were all level 16, while he was still level 3. With skills far better than his own, he concludes that they'll be fine without his help and decides to leave. However, before he can leave, he sees 2 goblins sneaking up behind the group. With the nerds already fighting as they were, if they are taken by surprise, they will be in trouble. Still in doubt, Haruka remembers the time the nerds shared a holographic Charizard with him and decides it's worth helping them. Without a second thought, he rushes out of the bushes with a stick in hand, and with a single blow, defeats the 2 goblins by surprise. He turns to the nerds and asks if everyone is all right. They are shocked to see Haruka there, but eventually thank him for his help. However, Haruka, who hasn't spoken to real people for a long time, has difficulty communicating with them. After a while, Haruka takes the nerds back to his cave, and they are amazed at how well organized the place is, considering it's just a cave. Haruka explains that he has learned some earth magic and crafting skills to improve the environment, but the nerds still find it impressive that he has done it all by himself. Haruka then prepares a drink for everyone and asks why they are in the forest so late at night. The nerds hesitate, but after a few seconds of silence, they reveal that they are running away from the rest of the gang. They explain that it all started right after class, when everyone was transported to this new isekai world. At first, everyone was just shocked by what had just happened, but soon the reality hit. They were trapped there, and they started to freak out about it. Some people coped better, like the popular girls who, although angry, weren't that scared, and the jocks who were trying to figure out what to do but didn't know anything about isekai. On the other hand, the nerds were in their element. The class representative was just as confused as everyone else, but quickly realized that crying in an unknown forest was a surefire way to attract unwanted predators and put everyone in danger. So she tried to calm everyone down. But it was too late. A group of goblins had already found the class, and the representative, not knowing how to deal with these monsters, began to lose her temper, which sent the whole class into a panic, even the delinquents. Realizing that someone had to act, the nerds activated their abilities, and together with the Jimbros, managed to defeat the goblins. Despite their victory, they knew it wasn't safe to remain there, so the representative called everyone's attention and insisted that they find a safe place to camp before they were attacked again. Shortly afterwards, the class managed to set up camp on the banks of a river, and the nerds took it upon themselves to teach everyone how to survive in that world, using their knowledge of isekai. The tasks were divided equally between the members of the class, and everything seemed to be going well, until one of the popular girls refused to do any of the work. The representative tried to convince her that everyone needed to help, and that all she had to do was help set up the tents. However, the popular girls weren't willing to collaborate with the camp chores, and seeing that they didn't do anything, the delinquents decided to follow suit and got lazy too. This left all the responsibility to the class rep and the nerds, who had to do all the work. In addition, the nerds dedicated themselves to protecting the camp, dealing with all the monsters that tried to get close. Although it was a lot of work, they knew it was necessary to keep everyone safe. During this time, in the White Room where the skills are distributed, the nerds discovered two disturbing skills that had been chosen by others: the Charm spell, which grants control over people, and the Puppeteer skill, which practically does the same. They knew that one of the delinquents had chosen the Puppeteer skill, which worried them, so they decided that they needed to level up quickly so that they could defend themselves if the delinquents tried anything. At night, the delinquents also went out to hunt monsters, but they did so only to level up and gain enough experience to use their control abilities. Meanwhile, the nerds, who were eavesdropping on their conversations, began to realize how serious the plan was. The delinquents were planning to use their abilities to turn the girls in the class into their slaves as soon as they were strong enough. Frightened by this possibility, the nerds alerted their class representative. Days later, the delinquents finally reached the level needed to use their abilities, and the first person they decided to attack was the class representative, taking advantage of the fact that she was alone. However, the nerds were ready and acted quickly, attacking the delinquents before they could use their abilities. With the delinquents defeated, their abilities were sealed, rendering them powerless. When the popular girls found out about the plan the delinquents had for them, they were furious. As a result, the delinquents were expelled from the camp, and it seemed that everything had finally been resolved. The delinquents, petty as ever, decided to attack the camp late at night, when the nerds weren't around to stop them. They caused enormous chaos, and, out of sheer spite, ended up setting fire to the whole camp, reducing it to ashes. When the nerds returned, they were devastated to see that all their hard work had been destroyed. To make matters worse, the popular girls began to blame them for the destruction, accusing them of antagonizing the delinquents and causing mayhem. The class representative, however, defended the nerds, reminding everyone that they were the reason the group had survived until that moment. The nerds appreciated her gesture, but realized that they could no longer bear to stay in a camp full of such ungrateful people, so they decided to run away. After hearing the whole story, Haruka feels bad for them and decides to prepare a mushroom feast to show support. He really enjoyed spending time with other people for the first time, but the next day, the nerds informed him that they would have to leave. They plan to go down into the forest to find a village and start their lives as adventurers. They even offer Haruka the chance to join the group, considering him a friend. Although he also sees them as friends, he refuses the offer, believing that his useless skills would only slow them down. What's more, he's worried about the situation at the class camp, especially the class representative, the only other person in the class he likes. Determined, Haruka decides to investigate what's going on. During his journey, he comes across a kobold, an aggressive creature that attacks him. Despite being bitten, Haruka manages to defeat it and continue on his way. In the evening, he arrives at the place where the camp is supposed to be, but to his surprise, the place is completely empty. Assuming that the class has moved on, he uses his detection skills to follow some footprints and soon comes across the popular girls. Haruka, hating dealing with them, tries to go back to his cave, but the girls have spotted him and start running after him. Even though he knows he could easily run away, he stops when he hears a word he never expected from them: please. Surprised, Haruka decides to talk to them. The girls ask him if he knows where the nerds are, but he hesitates, thinking that they just want to fight with them again. However, to his surprise, the girls explain that they want to sincerely apologize for the mistakes they made and the petty attitudes they had. They now recognize the value of the nerds and are determined to make up. Even so, they admit that on their own, they have no way of getting out of the forest and finding the nerds, as they don't know how to survive or defend themselves against monsters. Haruka asks if they really have the determination to redeem themselves, and realizing their desperation, he ends up agreeing to help them without thinking. At that moment, his subjugation ability is activated, and suddenly, the girls become his followers, ready to obey him. They now follow his orders without question, and face the monsters alongside Haruka, handing him the magic crystals they collect, as if expecting approval. Haruka is not happy about this change, but decides to continue for the time being. He notices that one of the girls has a small wound on her arm and, to help, hands her a healing potion he has prepared so that she can recover. However, instead of using the potion to heal her own wound, the girl uses the potion on Haruka, thanking him with a smile. This leaves Haruka frustrated, as he realizes that the girls only do things to please him and not to help themselves or the group effectively. He begins to feel increasingly uncomfortable about the situation, worried about how he's going to explain all this to the class representative if he ends up meeting her. Just as Haruka is reflecting on this situation, he sees the figure of the class representative walking through that part of the forest, slowly approaching. That's the end of episode 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of this adventure. Leave your like and activate the bell to stay up to date with all the episodes.